patient. You're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Walz, and my colleagues and members of the panel here today. Thank you for your commitment to our veterans. Undersecretary Young, the Veterans Crisis Line Handbook, what is the status of that?
If you're referring to the directive on the Veterans Crisis Line, it is in draft. It's going through concurrence.
How long has it been being worked on?
We have. Well, I've been in the job for 3 months. It's been in the works since I've been officially in the job. I know that much.
Are you working with veteran service organizations on that? I mean, are you opening up that process and taking input from other from veterans groups out there regarding this, and maybe the American Association of Suicidology and those kind of folks?
Well, we certainly work with in the Veterans Crisis Line, which is accredited by the American Association of Suicidology, and work to be in compliance with their standards. So our directive absolutely will be in alignment with the requirements to be accredited by an outside entity.
When were you accredited by the AAS?
I'm going to defer to Matt on that. That's before my time.
I believe that was in 2012 was the last date of our accreditation. It goes for 5 years. We're in the
It goes for 5 years. Okay, so you're up here this year.
December.
Okay, so it's not a one-time process. It's once every 5 years. Do they accredit the whole program? Do they go and credit call? Do they visit the call centers, backup call centers? How is the accreditation done?
So individual call centers are accredited. So inside the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, what I've learned from our partnership with NSPL is that individual call centers can be accredited, I think, through 7 different bodies of accreditation. We've chosen to remain with the American Association of Suicidology.
I want to talk about silent monitoring, and you're increasing the frequency of that use?
Well, going back a year, there was no silent monitoring. There was no quality assurance program.
What percentage of the calls now do you think are
I can
monitored
get you the
silently?
percentage on that, but what I will tell you is in a year, we have reviewed 4,178 calls.
What are you doing with the information, and do you find it effective?
We find it very effective. In fact, there's not a better way for us to be able to determine the success of a phone call in regards to establishing both non-critical and critical elements inside that veteran experience.
Thank you. Ms. Bryant, you have strong feelings about organizational structure and making sure that clinicians, there need to be a stronger role there. How can they work together? How do you envision that?
Well, we envision the clinicians being first of all, a part of the leadership team, and it should be an operations management and a clinical lead that work in tandem to establish protocols. And we would love to provide feedback if asked by the VA in order to demonstrate how we think that those best practices could be employed.
You said if asked by the VA. Now
Well, that would imply.
I hope the VA will ask.
We do regularly consult with, and then they do call us for our best practices.
Good.
And so we are in close conversation with the VA. We could do more. And so we're happy to offer our services in doing that and in helping to provide that evaluation. But again, we strongly believe that there's a robust way in which you can silently monitor calls, in which you could review calls, but then also manage the quality management and clinical review as a part of that expansion of the current protocol. It just simply does not go far enough. And so what we envision is more of that clinical lead and that clinical aspect, that individualized care being established into best practices that would need to go into that handbook.
You mentioned something in your testimony that struck me. You mentioned compassion fatigue. Those the veterans would call, those on the other end of the line, the stories they hear. Tell me about compassion fatigue, and is it real? And then how do you deal with that? How would the VA, the VCL, deal with that?
I'm going to go ahead and defer to Matt for that.
Again, that compassion fatigue, one of the first things we knew we needed to do was to establish the access. That simply meant hiring more qualified responders and SSAs. We've got an SSA, which is one of our employees. It is the specialty inside the Veterans Crisis Line that's responsible for coordinating emergency dispatches for intervention for those veterans that are at the highest risk of suicide, to include having a plan and ready to carry that plan out. And so one of the first things that we knew that we needed to do was to establish the capacity to be able to diffuse the amount of the workload. And so, as I mentioned earlier to the previous congressman in that discussion, we addressed that. We're now at near 100% access, and establishing that employee readiness and resilience program is important, adding those additional clinicians inside the organization so that we have those on board 24/7, 365. And again, make no mistake, any employee involved in Veterans Crisis Line experiences, they have the option and they are in charge of making sure that they take the time out in addition to the resources that exist inside VCL. And so they've got the opportunity to do that anytime they want.
Mr. Chairman, my time is up, but I beg for maybe another minute or two. Thank you. Thank you. Ms. Bryant, you talk about the importance of data and how can it help decrease in the end veteran suicides by looking at that data, then driving it backwards to its impetus?
Right. Well, we believe that the Veterans Crisis Line should fall under the purview of the Clay Hunt SAVE Act, as well as the Female Veteran Suicide Prevention Act. We asked for data reporting mechanisms just for that very reason, Congressman, to allow for us to utilize that data and figure out what we call in the Army TTPs, our techniques, tactics, and procedures that are our best practices for evaluating calls, for providing the highest standard of care. But we need the data to see that. I mentioned women veterans. I mentioned the fact that while 13% of your calls may be from women, that's all we know. We don't know anything beyond that, and we certainly don't know an evaluation of those women veterans of their experience during those calls. We would like to see that data recorded.
Undersecretary Young, I hope that you hear her and others who are calling for some great data mining on this. Ms. Kelleher, how is the VA doing with the VCL in your assessment of connecting veterans with these emotional war wounds, these battle scars, to the local level where they can get some real help right at home?
VFW believes that overall VCL has done great with improving, particularly after the report last year, and since they're launching of the ATL VCL, the Atlanta one. And the resources, we firmly believe that the majority of responders do know, but unfortunately, if even one doesn't know the resources available locally or the proper protocol, just like anything, it brings the whole thing down. You're only as strong as your weakest link. So we do believe that with the monitoring capabilities that they do have now, that will help hold those individuals more accountable, as well as show just how many people are not aware fully of the local resources. But we do believe that they're overall doing much better and improving.
Then just a final question. Ms. Bryant, you mentioned in your testimony about the invisible war, wounds of war, and these emotional battle scars. It's one thing when the military leaves the Department of Defense and leaves their service, and they're told about their benefits and services available to them, and presumably the Veterans Crisis Line that could be available to them. I'm wondering if, going back even further than that, upon leaving the Department of Defense, is there any kind of emotional or mental review or debriefing or checkup that the Department of Defense gives those who are leaving, and if not, should there be?
Thank you, Congressman, for that question. It's definitely something that can be improved upon. A lot of the time, when we talk about veterans issues as a whole, we recognize that things should happen, quote unquote, left of the bank. Things should happen while you're still in uniform, transitioning from DOD or under the purview of DOD. And you have that continuity of care as you move forward to the VA. You have Military OneSource, you have other mental health services that are provided while you're still in uniform, and that's usually reported through reporting procedures through your chain of command, and sometimes you don't have to even go through them to dial Military OneSource. So that would be, well, I understand the DOD's answer to giving that veteran care. But then you also have the transition and you have the evaluation that you go through at the time when you first separate from the military. I can speak to my own experiences when I separated from the military, to where I went through my physical evaluation at the VA. Yes, there was a screening for mental health, but this was also 2009 when I separated, and I will say that it was nowhere near what is probably provided today, and it was probably insufficient for what I received when I separated from military service. We would love to see a robust battle handoff from the uniform to when you come home.
Well, thank you for that. And I want to thank all of you for coming here today and your love and care for our veterans and your wanting to make the VCL strong. And I want to thank our chairman and ranking member for allowing me to be here today, and you're pressing on this issue to make sure we get it right, all of us.
Thank you. We now know what an Iowa minute is, don't we?
I spent a lifetime in Iowa.